Welcome to Deep Dive. We dive into the fairy world of Ireland. We have 3 sources for this deep dive, 2 websites, and the book The Middle Kingdom, The Fairy World of Ireland by Dermot Manus.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're venturing into the really captivating realm of Irish fairy lore. We have 2 quite intriguing sources guiding us. There's Jesse Howe's Crossing the Threshold, which is, more modern take on how these beliefs are evolving.
Right.
And then Dermot McManus's The Middle Kingdom, The Fairy World of Ireland, which is just packed with firsthand accounts, observations.
Yeah, and what's great is that contrast, like you said. How is sort of looking at how things are fading maybe with modern life. While McManus, he really opens the door to a time when belief was, everywhere, almost just part of the air you breathed.
So our goal today really is to try and understand why these old stories still grab us. What do they tell us about Irish culture, maybe even human nature?
Exactly. What's the enduring appeal?
And it's worth remembering, isn't it, that storytelling in old Ireland, it wasn't just, entertainment.
Oh, absolutely not. It was central.
Right. Around the fire, in the market, the pub, a bit like how we tell ghost stories maybe, and tied into beliefs about ancestors, the afterlife.
Definitely. These weren't just whimsical tales. They were connected to how people understood the world, interpreting mysteries, connecting with the past.
But then, modernity happened. Electricity kind of chased away the real dark. Technology offered instant everything.
Right.
And Howe points out, this really shifted our sense of night and day, pulled us away from nature's rhythms and, the old stories too.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The very environment that nurtured these stories changed so radically. That shared experience, the slower pace, gone mostly. Replaced by something else.
And yet, here we are, talking about fairies. They still have this pull. So the big question Howe asks is, why? Why do they still captivate us, despite all these huge changes?
Okay, let's try and unpack that, the appeal.
Yep.
Well, one thing Howe brings up is this kind of pushback, resistance against technology always being on, always intruding on quiet time.
You feel that, don't you? Like something's being lost in this constant digital rush, a need for just quiet connection. Unfiltered moments.
Exactly. It feels like a real yearning maybe for that older, slower way of life, more aligned with nature, a break from the modern machine, as Howell calls it.
Yeah, that's a great phrase.
And beyond that, there's just that human thing, isn't there? Wanting to reach beyond the everyday, the mundane. These stories, they offer a peek into something.
Right.
More. Something else. Sparks the imagination.
Something that really struck me in Howe's writing was how subtle the magic often is. Not big flashy stuff necessarily.
Right.
It often happens in that murky, misty hour, twilight, when things blur a bit.
That liminal space, threshold time, day turning into night. That's often seen as when the boundary thing's out, right?
Yeah.
Between our world and, the fairy world. It hints that maybe your state of mind shifts then too, more receptive.
And this idea of a veil separating their world, a place outside normal time and space. McManus talks about that too. He notes, encounters often happen when people are alone, away from distractions.
Which is interesting. Is there a link? Solitude, maybe heightened awareness, being more open to things?
Could be. When you're not bombarded with noise, perhaps your inner senses sharpen up a bit.
Yeah, maybe.
Howe also mentions the older generation's unshakable belief. I mean, they grew up with this stuff.
Right. Heard the stories, maybe had experiences passed down through families. That's how traditions survive, isn't it? Shared understanding, validating experiences within the community.
Totally. And it all circles back to that quote from Eddie that Howe shares. To respect the good people is basically to respect yourself.
That's quite profound, actually.
Isn't it? It suggests this deep link between, us and the natural world, recognizing we're part of something bigger. Maybe more mysterious.
Respecting the unseen might be like respecting the unknown parts of ourselves and the world. Yeah.
So let's shift focus a bit to McManus. His approach to collecting these stories, he was really careful about authenticity, wasn't he?
Oh, definitely. He wanted living, reliable people willing to stand by their experiences. Incidents he felt were well authenticated, not just rumors.
You get the sense he really wanted to present these not just as folklore, but as potentially real experiences within those people's lives.
Exactly. Grounded in testimony he trusted.
He also draws a line between Ireland and places like Brittany, southwest France, where similar traditions persist. So it's not just an Irish thing.
Right. It suggests this belief in a spirit world tied to nature might be more widespread, maybe shared roots, similar environments, history.
And then he gets into this interesting idea about primitive peoples and children being like children of nature.
Yeah, having this natural clarity, something maybe lost when we get detached from nature, surrounded by artificial stuff.
He even suggests they might be better at psychic contacts.
That's a common theme in folklore, isn't it? The idea that those less cluttered by modern life have a more direct line to the spiritual, the supernatural, kids especially. Right. More open, less skeptical maybe. Sense is not dulled yet.
Let's dig into that rural connection Manus describes. He paints this picture of traditional Irish communities really living with nature.
Yeah, totally interwoven. Lives tied to seasons, a constant sort of spiritual outlook. It wasn't separate, it was just part of everything. Daily life, how they saw the world, the landscape.
And contrast that with the modern view. He sees the countryside as just a resource for cities, driven by materialism, factory thinking.
Leading to this disconnect, he argues, from beauty, from nature spirits. The focus shifts to, usefulness, profit, efficiency, maybe losing that sense of wonder.
That tree planting example he gives is really powerful.
Isn't it?
Shifting from planting beautiful, slow-growing trees for the future to just quick-growing softwoods for profit now.
It really symbolizes that whole shift, doesn't it? From a long-term, maybe spiritual view to immediate material gain. Trees become commodities, not living parts of the landscape.
Manus doesn't pull punches either, criticizing the materialists in the towns with their superficial education without wisdom. Strong stuff.
Yeah, it shows that tension, right? Between deep-rooted rural beliefs and this newer, urban, maybe more rational worldview. Though, importantly, he does say these contacts still happen in Ireland. The beliefs haven't vanished.
Which brings us to the nature of these encounters themselves. Manus points out something crucial. If a story fits our material worldview, we call it history.
Right.
If it doesn't, if it's supernatural, it gets dismissed as, just imagination. Fancy.
There's definitely a bias there, isn't there? We tend to validate what fits our box and ignore what doesn't. It filters how we even hear these stories.
He also floats the idea that maybe some fairy tales started as exaggerated stories about old heroes, merging over time with Celtic mythology. These stories aren't static, they evolve.
And the oral tradition is absolutely central to that. Stories passed down generation to generation. Each telling might add a little something, change a detail, maybe exaggerate a bit. Lines blur between history, myth, fairies.
The scale of it is mind-blowing. A beggar man taking 7 nights for one tale.
Incredible.
And a storyteller knowing 350 tales.
Yeah. Just shows how vital memory and storytelling were. Before widespread literacy, that was your library, your history, your entertainment. These tellers were masters.
Yeats had an interesting take, Manus notes. He thought folk and bardic tales were maybe closer to historical fact than fairy legends.
Suggesting more embroidery in the fairy stuff, especially way back when spirit and material world seemed closer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fairy legends are about more elusive things, right? So they'd be more open to imagination, symbolism, tweaking over time.
Although Manus does add that recent embroidery seems less common, or at least within bounds. So maybe more consistency in later tellings.
Still, despite all the variations, this core belief in some kind of spirit world seems almost universal, doesn't it?
Manus thinks so. He points to Romans deifying emperors, similar stories popping up independently in different cultures.
Suggesting it fills some deep human need.
Yeah, maybe the mind is just wired to look beyond the purely material for meaning, explanation, wonder, connecting to something bigger. These stories do that.
Okay, let's try and get a handle on classifying these fairy folk. It can seem a bit chaotic.
It can. Manus talks about the she, the pagan gods and goddesses, basically, now in the fairy realm, merging with tales of early Christian saints.
So, adapting the old beliefs into the new framework.
Pretty much. The shes are often seen as embodying these higher spiritual ideals. A link to the ancient past, woven into the new religion.
But then you have all the stories about ordinary people interacting with fairies, often sparked by finding a magic item or bumping into certain beings.
Like the seal folk, right, the selkies, shifting between seal and human form.
And those really unsettling changeling stories, a fairy baby swapped for a human one.
Those tales really explore boundaries, don't they? Between worlds, anxieties about family, kids, the unknown. A more personal, sometimes scary connection.
Manus lists quite a few types.
Yeah.
Seal folk, leprechauns, cluricauns, banshees in Ireland.
Then pixies, brownies, glaistigs in England and Scotland.
And he says gnomes, dwarfs, pukas probably belong in there too. It's a whole ecosystem.
It really is. Each with its own lore, personality, behavior. Reflects a complex view of unseen forces, mischievous, helpful, dangerous, like nature itself, really.
He makes a clear line, though, between fairies and witches' familiars.
Yeah, those familiars are usually seen as wicked spirits, helping with harm. But he suggests, maybe sympathetically, that many were probably just pets of lonely, accused women.
A reminder of how easily things get misinterpreted, especially for people on the margins.
Definitely.
Okay, back to modernity's impact. Manus sees cars, tractors, this practical education. He thinks it creates standardized, semi-educated minds. Pretty critical view.
He definitely sees it as eroding tradition, that deep spiritual connection. Less room for wonder, imagination, the unseen in his view.
But he does see persistence. Countrymen still out working at dusk betwixt the two lights, that magical time.
Or checking animals at night, still connected to those older rhythms, those times when the veil might be thin. The possibility is still there.
He also nails that country shyness. People keeping beliefs private from strangers, especially scoffers.
And that tendency to be polite, maybe agree rather than be totally precise, makes it hard for outsiders. You need trust, patience.
Absolutely. Earn that trust, show respect, and then you might hear the real stories, the deep beliefs, expressed really vividly.
Right.
Like the Sligo tradition he mentions. Call them the gentle people if you don't cross them. Big warning there.
Don't offend the good people. It reinforces that they're tied to the land, country beings. Respecting them is like respecting nature's balance.
It's not a simple view, though. He says fairies might know more about some things, but be ignorant about others. Even call some lower earth folk kind of low and stupid.
Yeah, it suggests complexity, maybe even a hierarchy within the fairy world. Different types, different powers, different levels of wisdom, like human society in a way.
Ultimately, he stresses, our knowledge is limited. Country tradition is the best source we have.
And tradition isn't static, is it? It's accumulated experience, passed down. A living thing, he calls it. Always evolving.
Which means, he argues, we have to take fresh additions, new stories, new experiences seriously.
Because it is a living thing. It's grounded in people's ongoing experiences, not just old books.
He even talks about meeting reliable people who claim to have seen them. Many still alive when he wrote, so you could, in theory, ask them.
These seeings, he calls them. Rare, maybe, but still happening, which leads into some of the specific examples he gives.
Yeah, these brief glimpses are fascinating, like the Thornhill Fairy. Little girl sees a small man in green, right in her room.
Or the cow encounter, where a girl sees a tiny fairy tap a cow, then vanish into a ditch.
The boulder figure.
Yeah.
Two boys see a small figure in brown dodge behind a rock, then gone. No place to hide.
Eerie. And the Clonmillan she kid seeing this silent circle of dark figures in black, a bagpipe on a chest. Chilling.
The Hater figure on the moor, the Wicklow fairy in black leaving that weird clock thing, the Wandsworth pixie in the fire. Each one is just so specific, so strange.
They really are. The details, clothes, actions, how they vanish. They build this rich, varied picture of what these encounters are reportedly like.
Let's talk about fairy trees now. Manus says they're maybe more closely linked to fairies than even the forts, the raths, duns, lisses.
Trees just have that powerful symbolism, don't they? Old, rooted, connecting earth and sky. Natural focal points for these beliefs.
He mentions the lone thorn bushes everyone knows about, but says it's not just white thorn.
Right. Oak is big, especially twisted mountain oak. Broom, Scots fir, rowan, blackthorn, even ragwort.
Juniper and ivy in Scotland, but not so much Ireland. And hazel, of course, the tree of knowledge in mythology.
The specific trees often have their own meaning in folklore, right? Oak for strength, hazel for wisdom, reflects their cultural importance and just, well, their presence in the landscape.
And while whitethorn is often for protection against witches, some are fairy trees themselves. Or even haunted. Not always friendly.
Context is key, isn't it? Location matters. A tree inside a fairy fort near a spring on a bank. That's different from one just out in a field. More likely to be protected, significant.
That story about the little master trying to move a fairy thorn.
Yeah. Locals refuse, he struggles himself.
Yeah.
Really shows the respect, maybe fear around them.
And the idea that harming one brings bad luck.
Yeah.
Even wrens nesting nearby get upset if someone's disrespectful, like smoking there.
It's a powerful kind of environmental respect, isn't it? Protects these significant trees.
He mentions the fairy trilogy, oak, ash, thorn used for protection.
But also warns about hostile spirits near some roadside thorns. Mr. Murphy feeling that wave of hostility.
And the warning about groups of 3 or more thorns, especially in an L or V shape, That tragic story of John Solon cutting one down, then the fatal stroke.
Yeah, definitely shows the darker, more dangerous side. Not all gentlefolk. These stories are warnings.
Okay, on to the puka, derived from puck, meaning buck coat.
Right. And he makes a distinction. The Irish puka is tougher, potentially scary or harmful, not just the playful English puck.
More predictable, maybe wilder.
Seems like it. Not just a trickster, but potentially powerful, even dangerous if you don't show respect.
He argues against seeing it as purely evil, though. Says in traditional tales, it could be friendly, helpful, if treated right. Maybe the nursery tale version softened it.
Seems likely. Its nature in the stories often depends on how people interact with it, doesn't it? Respect might get a good response. Disrespect, maybe not.
Manus shares more recent accounts too. Often a black pony, blazing eyes, especially in Ulster.
Or a big black dog, distinctive tail, elsewhere. Like the Trinity students encounter, or the lady whose dog freaked out. People are still reporting this stuff. It suggests the belief is still alive, the puka is still perceived as being around, even if unseen mostly. Makes the lore feel immediate, not just ancient history.
Now for some lighter stuff, maybe. Fairy pranks and mischief.
Though still pretty weird.
Definitely. And Manus stresses the countrymen telling these stories were sharp observers, not easily fooled.
Right.
Like the milk bowl moved mysteriously onto a stone, or the field briefly looking like a dense potato patch to a kid.
Mickey O'Mahony's lantern getting kicked into the spring over and over. The artist's canvas vanishing and reappearing.
The haystack lifting up and moving. And that empty music room in the tower, with sounds just moments before.
What do you make of all that? It's classic trickster stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, playful, disruptive, but mostly harmless. Little reminders that something else is there. Maybe messing with ordinary life just a bit.
A gentle nudge, sometimes inconvenient.
Ireland's landscape is just soaked in this stuff, isn't it? So many places sacred to fairies reflected in the names. Hills, Helix especially, sometimes overlapping ancient sites.
That story about Mickey building his house is great. He's careful, chooses a spot not between fairy forts, uses holy water.
But the neighbors are still like, whoa, better check with the wise woman. Shows how ingrained respecting these fairy paths is.
Absolutely. The land itself has rules, pathways you shouldn't block. Disturbing them is risky.
Especially dilting across a path, particularly one going west. That's seen as really dangerous.
That story about Dr. O'Kelly and Michael Hagan, it's chilling. The illnesses, the deaths in the family, stopping only when they tore down that westward extension built across the line between two forts.
And the neighbors backed it up. It's a stark warning.
Powerful cautionary tale, for sure. Shows the potential severity of disrespecting those boundaries. Community validation adds huge weight.
Shanity Crossroads, too. Those weird grass mounds. Definitely fairy territory, people believed. Try to fence it. Fences get wrecked. Trouble at home follows.
Then the narrator's own childhood memory at the cliff picnic. Seeing those weird twinkling lights when the car stopped suddenly.
Yeah, and the driver's panic. The mother protesting.
Yeah.
Something clearly happened.
It points to certain places having this unique energy, maybe. More accessible to the other world. The Shanty problems, the lights. Something beyond normal explanation.
And when the narrator went back later, the field full of silent crows and daws, acting weirdly.
Finding that little black stone on the strange red earth ledge in a damaged mound, no logic to it, leaves you wondering.
Adds layers of mystery, doesn't it? The bird behavior, the weird stone. Suggests something odd really did happen there.
Manus mentions other light sightings in that field too. Different colors, red, green, blue, yellow. Sometimes steady, sometimes moving over the left. Two sisters even saw different colors at the same time.
And he argues they're not will-o'-the-wisp. Two steady, varied colors, different movement. Will-o'-the-wisp is usually a ball of light over bogs, sometimes breaking up.
Right. The details help distinguish them from known phenomena. Strengthens the idea they might be something else, connected to the fairy activity there.
Now the last one, Mr. Harris and the missing stile. Path just vanishes near a fairy thorn, then reappears later. Classic impish trick.
Perfectly captures that playful but disorienting side of things. A subtle tweak to reality. Noticeable but not harmful. Trickster stuff again.
Okay, shifting to a darker side now. Hostile spirits, hurtful spells.
Yeah, it's not all mischief. There's Mike getting mysteriously sick after hammering a door on May Day, a time linked to hungry grass.
These traditions often link certain times, like May Day, Beltane, Samhain, with more supernatural risks, right? Hungry grass, explaining sudden illness. Fascinating concept.
Then there's Mr. Murphy after the committee meeting. Collapses, then eats a whole loaf of bread ravenously, like something interfered supernaturally with his meal.
Hints at more direct, maybe malevolent, interference. disrupting normal physical things inexplicably.
And the grandfather's story, the noisy stable, horses panicking at something unseen.
And later, his reaction to finding a single potato in the yard, making the sign of the cross immediately, suggests a deep fear about certain things holding negative energy.
His reaction really speaks volumes, doesn't it? Ingrained beliefs, anxieties. The potato trigger suggests some specific, maybe personal association with harm.
We also have Dr. Sellers and Ms. Sharp visiting the patient. The doctor scoffs a bit at talk of disturbances.
And bang, a huge crash on the door, but no damage found later.
Classic skeptic gets a shock story. Reinforces the idea that disbelief can bring consequences.
Seems like it. These stories often serve as warnings within the tradition.
And finally, that really unsettling island. Haunted by restless spirits, demons due to past tragedies, Eileen's encounter there.
Yeah, seeing a shapeless black thing, hearing a warning voice, running in terror. Much darker, much scarier side of the spirit world.
Taps into deeper fears, doesn't it? Malevolent entities, places scarred by tragedy, holding on to that darkness. Her experience sounds terrifying.
Which brings us neatly to belief versus skepticism. Manus maps out the different stances. Unquestioning believer, dismissive scoffer, the agnostic on the fence, even the atheist.
A little dig about physics.
Right, but his main point is, don't just dismiss it all as nonsense. Look at the evidence, the experiences from all sorts of people.
Crucial point. Just waving it away is too simple. Need a more nuanced approach. Acknowledge the experience, the cultural weight, even if it doesn't fit neatly into a scientific box.
He also tackles how subjective our senses are. Seeing is believing isn't always reliable, is it?
Nope. And he distinguishes superstition, just believing something is lucky or unlucky, without knowing why, from these reported experiences of sensible people.
And he admits inventing superstitions himself, which is quite funny, but also shows how easily unfounded beliefs can spread. Important difference there.
He considers psychological explanations too. Hallucination, illusion, delusion, obsession. Acknowledges they explain some claims.
But argues many others don't fit so easily. Quotes Professor Huxley on keeping an open mind when faced with the unusual.
So his conclusion is basically, stay open-minded. Wise approach. But ultimately, you have to make your own judgment.
Exactly. It's about interpretation, willingness to consider possibilities beyond current science. The fact these stories last suggests they hold meaning for people, even if we can't quantify it.
So the deep dive wraps up with 3 short appendices. Quick mentions.
Yeah. Appendix Herban is on Biddy Early, famous 19th century wise woman in Clare. Healer connected to fairies, still legendary. Even Yeats was interested.
Appendix 2 gives examples of magic cures attributed to fairies, like Agnes's leg healing incredibly fast after a ritual.
Plus folk cures for grit in eyes, warts, whooping cough, often mixing ritual with maybe some religious elements.
And Appendix 3 just reiterates that idea of country people having special healing gifts, some practical, some seemingly magical.
They all just add more texture, don't they? Show how deeply these beliefs were woven into everyday life, health, community, understanding the world.
So wrapping this all up, we've really journeyed through this amazing mix of nature and the supernatural in Irish lore.
Yeah, seeing how modernization impacted it, why it still fascinates us, the sheer variety of encounters and practices.
And while sure, some stories might have natural explanations or be imagination,
a lot of them really push back against easy answers, don't they? They point to this incredibly rich, complex way of seeing the world, where the ordinary and extraordinary aren't so separate.
it gives us this valuable window, maybe, into a different way of perceiving reality, acknowledging connections, possibilities, something other. Worth respecting these traditions even if we don't fully get them.
Which leaves us with that final thought for you, the listener. In our tech-heavy, science-driven world, what might we be losing if we just dismiss the other out of hand?
And what does it say about us? About our fundamental human needs for wonder, connection, maybe just a little bit of magic, that these ancient stories still resonate so strongly?
Definitely something to think about. We'd encourage you to explore more Irish folklore and maybe look for similar traditions in other cultures too. It's fascinating stuff.